Welcome to Green and Red, Scrappy Politics for Scrappy People, a regular podcast on radical environmental and anti-capitalist politics, brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
Welcome to the silky smooth sounds of the Green and Red podcast. It's your Scrappy Sunday fun day, as we like to call it here at the Green and Red podcast. I'm Scott Parkin, your co-host in beautiful, sunny, super blooming Berkeley, California. And as always, I'm joined by
Bob Bazanko in sunny and actually fairly warm Niles, Ohio. And not only is it a Scrappy Sunday, but it's kind of the start of Scrappy Summer, since I think the kids are all done with school and baseball's in high gear and the Indy 500 has been run. And so it's time to enjoy, kind of lay back. And I know that a lot of people are probably looking for something to do during their summer, looking for some entertainment, and the Green and Red podcast is here for you. So if you're watching or listening right now, make sure you hit that subscribe button and share it. And we have all kinds of great stuff that we've been doing and we plan on doing, and we do it because of you.
Yeah, and we have been bringing a lot of edgy episodes and edgy interviews to you. Very informative, very. We like to consider some of our work, people's personal political education, and we've had some really great shows about FBI infiltration of radical movements. We've had the great Seymour Hersh on talking about the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline. We've talked to Noam Chomsky about the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. We actually did our own show on the end of the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War, and we just have a lot of stuff cranking out. And also, I'll say we did this like one really exciting show where we talked to the director of How to Blow Up a Pipeline, Daniel Goldhaber, and sort of like dug deep into that as well. And so we're actually at the Green Red podcast not only talking to the intellectual immortals, if you will, and radical intellectual immortals like Noam Chomsky and Seymour Hersh, but we're brushing with Hollywood, and so that's a very important thing to just note.
Yeah, it's and also I think we do probably the best radical history you're going to get. We've done tons of shows in the 3+ years on that, and this year in particular, I'm looking forward to our kind of JFK extravaganza. It's the 60th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. This is something we've done a lot of, and so we're going to kind of ramp it up and do a lot on that, not just about the silly conspiracy theories, which are gaining more circulation all the time, but about the reality of Kennedy. And I think that's important because it talks about the reality of liberalism and the kind of romanticization of liberal politics by too many people. And, if you want to get kind of stuff like that, this is the place to come. In addition to, we do great stuff on Ukraine, which, isn't that easy to come by. We take on the NATO liberals and the NATO left on the Ukraine issue. We're going to do more on that soon because, the war is still going on. It's still a bloodbath, and Americans are still supporting it and calling for even more American involvement. And so that's something we want to take on. But, whenever something is going on, we're going to talk about it. I think we generally have a different idea, a different take on these things than the kind of typical left does, or we don't go after the kind of typical targets. And so we appreciate it. Our numbers have gone way up. They can get even bigger. So, if you're looking at it right now, hit the subscribe button, like the videos, tell people about it, share it, all that kind of stuff. It's what keeps us going. We've done, what are we up at, like 220, 210, 220 shows, something like that?
I believe with the sort of current cycle of interviews and shows we have in the can, we'll be up almost to 230.
Wow. Just two kids with a dream. That's hard to believe that
two kids. There's over 230 hours of Bob and Scott talking on the internet, which is
it's enough for anybody. Yeah.
And more coming.
That's plenty. Yeah. And yeah, we do. We have a lot of good stuff planned too. Talking to some great people. We're going to do another show on Stockton Land, the great Stockton Land, and just all kinds of neat stuff that's coming up. And so we really appreciate it. We really want you to spread the word about this. It don't cost nothing unless you want to send us some money, which we would gladly take. But otherwise, we do this because we're talking to people who normally aren't going to get much of an audience, right? Most left media even doesn't really talk to them. They're too busy with their own fights over God knows what. I really kind of can't follow it anymore. They're either telling you that air conditioning and nuclear power is great, or you've got these failed comedians who are telling you that the vaccine is a plot, and it's just horrific, right?
They're not even that funny. I mean,
No,
I see why they're failed comedians, because their jokes kind of
Yeah.
land flat for me. But I'm
Yeah.
kind of old school when it comes to
Yeah,
that.
no,
So,
and I mean they've got millions of people following them and sharing and spreading their misinformation, and so I think we're never going to be that big. We don't have that kind of money, but I think it's important to kind of put this out there, to put something else out there, and to take left misinformation on as well. I think it's kind of easy to go after Trump and DeSantis and all these people, Greg Abbott. We do plenty of that, and we'll continue to. But at some point you have to look more inward, and there are plenty of people who would describe themselves as people on the left, or even socialists or radicals or whatever, who I think really are not helping us. Who are actually damaging, kind of the causes that we believe in. So, keep checking us out, and if you have any ideas, let us know.
yep. And the last thing I'll say is, because this is very much near and dear to my heart, is that there are active movements going on out in the world and in the U.S. And one of the important roles that I feel like the Green and Red podcast plays is we do a lot to uplift those movements. We have a big emphasis in this show on organizing and direct action. We both got to know each other because we were organizing protests and direct action against the war in Iraq and against corporate globalization. And so this is also a good go-to place to have your sort of finger on the pulse of a lot of movement news, and a lot of like deeper dives into like why people are organizing against whatever bad thing they're organizing against.
Yeah.
And so that's another pitch here.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we talked about the forest defenders in Atlanta and the ongoing crisis there, and we'll continue to do that. And so, when there's something going on, it's important, I think, to get that out there, because I mean, it's, there's a massive left media, right? The internet is pretty big, and you can find stuff if you look for it. But at the same time, sometimes the biggest left media ignore these things because they have their own kind of, I think, celebrity, ideas about what should be out there and what isn't. And they're really good at promoting themselves, far better than we are, actually, when you think about it. So
to be honest, I feel like they're the sort of minor leagues of people trying to get on MSNBC and CNN. So
yeah,
they're all just waiting in the wings to get their MSNBC show.
Yeah.
Whereas Bob and I have no such ambition. We just want to like make trouble and have some fun, have a few laughs.
Yeah, I gave up on my dreams long ago. I mean, when I was a kid, I thought I was going to be playing for the Yankees, and that never happened. So I've just kind of gotten used over the years to kind of dialing things back and being more reasonable. And we're not going to be Brooklyn lefties, but I think I would like really feel kind of weird if we were saying those kinds of things. It would be bizarre to actually put that out there and to have this kind of weird, kind of cult about you. So we're not going to do that.
Yep.
But we're going to tell you stuff that you're not going to hear. We're going to hopefully make you a little uncomfortable at times, and maybe encourage you to find out more about the people and the actions that we talk about. So be scrappy this summer. It's time for get scrappy this summer.
Scrappy Summer, and support your favorite lefty boutique Scrappy podcast and YouTube show, the Green and Red Podcast. And here's the pitch. If you want to help support us, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Follow us on all of those. Like, share us as much as you can. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit subscribe. If you're listening to this on an audio platform and you haven't subscribed, subscribe there. Also, please rate and review us. It helps us with the algorithms. And then the big ask is, please consider becoming a supporter of the Green and Red Podcast. You can go to greenandredpodcast.org and hit the support button, make a one-time donation, or you can go to our Patreon page and become a patron at patreon.com/greenredpodcast. And we're here for you, and we're here to support movements from animal rights to labor to climate to anti-war, and give you a good dose of radical politics and radical history. And so that's us. That's the Green and Red Podcast, and we hope you will support us.
And thank you for listening to our pitch. And
Yep.
now we can start doing the fun stuff and talk
Now
about
on with the show. On with the show.
on with the show. Yeah. We usually start with kind of a little bit of a history lesson on kind of radical history this week. And I know, Scott, you have some stuff prepared for that.
Yep. And I'll just read these off with, I'll try not to editorialize too much as I put these out. And the first one's not really, I guess in a way it's a little bit of radical history, but it's definitely an important piece of history. On May 31st, this week in history, 1927, Donald Trump's father, Fred Trump, was arrested at a Ku Klux Klan rally in Queens, New York. And despite Donald Trump denying that it happened, multiple newspapers reported it giving Fred Trump's address and reporting that all of those arrested were wearing KKK robes. So it runs in the family. Okay, I guess I did editorialize a little bit. And speaking of riots.
Well, the Republicans like to attack, men who dress in like, dresses, but what the hell is the KKK doing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Those
robes and gowns seem to be fine for the Klan.
It's like, you ever see a picture like of bishops at a high mass? Dude, ain't no drag show in the world that's that flamboyant, and drag shows, kids are perfectly safe around a bunch of priests and bishops. Oh, hell no. So,
or Klansmen,
right? We're talking about grooming, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, Vidal Sassoon is jealous of them. So, boom.
Boom.
Laughing. That's funny.
Boom.
Vidal Sassoon grooming.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I get it. It's good. That's good. Okay. Some good stuff. See, we're way more funnier than fucking Jimmy Dore or Joe Rogan. Fuck those guys. June 3rd, 1943, 200 white Navy sailors attacked zoot suit wearing Mexican American children in Los Angeles. Police arrested the victims of the attacks, and the city council even tried to ban the wearing of the zoot suit. The zoot suit riots broke out in several cities. On May 27th in 1974, the first of two car bombings that killed the Los Cias de Boulder, who were 6 Chicano activists and students in Boulder, Colorado. The activists were protesting the negative treatment of Mexican American students at the University of Colorado. And, in this week in history, we actually talked about a car bombing in Oakland with Judy Berry and Daryl Cherney. It was a pretty common tactic for people organizing on the left, whether they were organizing for, Mexican American rights or to, stop the clear cut of the redwoods to be attacked by police or right-wing vigilante with car bombs. And then the last one I have on my list is in June 1977. After a much criticized trial, Native American activist Leonard Peltier was sentenced to 2 life terms for his alleged role in the death of FBI agents at a camp of the American Indian movement on the Pine Ridge Reservation. The fight for his release continues. And very much like an important cause. There's a lot of good documentaries out there about Leonard Peltier's case. If you don't know about it, you should definitely kind of look into that history. It's a very important story that needs to be told. And on this show, we would like to be very critical of the FBI. The liberal establishment loves the FBI, especially these days, but we recognize the role in which they have played in disrupting and destroying the left. Something we're going to talk about a little bit more here in a little bit.
Yeah. The historical event this week that I want to kind of framework is on June 6, 1968, 55 years ago, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in California. He was running for president. He had just won the California primary. And the reason I bring this up, well, a couple of reasons. One, Kennedy was essentially your traditional liberal. But in 1968, he had started to move in directions that most of the Democrats hadn't. He had come out strongly against the war, although he had supported early on as his brother's attorney general. He talked about the kids all the time, meaning groups like SDS and civil rights activists. he was sympathetic to them. He went out to California and marched with Chavez and the farm workers. So it was a fairly progressive, campaign up to that point. And Kennedy was killed by Sirhan Sirhan, a Palestinian who the story went was upset at Kennedy's and the Democrats' basically unadulterated support of Israel. And so it's important to understand, like, there was this kind of transformation of Bobby Kennedy in 1968 into a more progressive candidate. And there are, some really moving stories about how people on the left, SDS, even Weather Underground people responded to his death. But the reason I bring it up also is because it's become kind of an issue again now that RFK Jr. is running for president. Now he's running for president essentially on he kind of became more famous recently because he's an anti-vaxxer. But since he started this campaign, he's also brought another conspiracy in, and this is something we talk about a lot, just kind of the left and conspiracy theory. And, Bobby Kennedy Jr. is now claiming that his uncle was killed by the CIA or the military industrial complex, the Oliver Stone line. And he's also claiming that his father was the victim of some kind of deep state conspiracy. And people on the left, a lot of people on the left are latching on to that. The crazies, in the Oliver Stone cracker factory are jumping all over it. And, once again, it's just like, I think this is something we'll talk about in the future, coming up. These conspiracy theories don't do us any good. They kind of, give you this idea that there are these kind of good people operating and decisions, and they're making good decisions, but then other people, these, malicious actors are imposing, things upon them, like assassinations of the Kennedys or something like that, in order to root out the people who want to change society. And that's just kind of silly. There's no one, JFK or anybody else, was going to reverse the Cold War in 1963. Bobby Kennedy wasn't going to somehow become a supporter, wasn't becoming a supporter of Palestinian rights in 1968. All of these people are agents of the ruling class. Politicians are, media are, intellectuals, most professors are, right? And they're kind of inbred in this system. And so what you have isn't, people who are going to try to change everything and kind of reverse the Cold War and the Vietnam War and the repression of Cuba, whatever, right? They're not doing that. Essentially, what we have are these kind of debates at a very high level between agents of the ruling class who basically see the world the same way. And the people who report on it aren't being, manipulated or conned into accepting the government's line, and portraying it. They're not agents of the deep state. That's just the system in which they operate. I mean, you and I, we're never going to work for the New York Times, not because we don't buy into any of these weird things. We're not going to do that. That's not our ideology. That's not our political culture, right?
Right.
And so it's not like you have to be brainwashed into, people who work for the New York Times aren't brainwashed into working for the different. They believe it. That's, Gramscian cultural hegemony. And I think that's something to understand when we talk about Bobby Kennedy, when we talk about conspiracies. These people believe in the system, right? Because that's the way they were indoctrinated. They're not hiding stuff and they're not covering stuff up in defense of the deep state. They don't think that way. To them, that's just natural, it's no conspiracy that the media is, pimping for the Ukraine war. That's the way they believe. That's who they are. And so I think we have to understand that and quit looking for these, like, every time something happens now, a lot of people are saying, okay, what was the CIA's role in this? Or what did the NSC do? And it's not, that's the way the state works. And I think, if we'd accept that, it's actually, to me, far more radical. Remember after 9/11, immediately, a bunch of people said, oh, it's an inside job. Mossad did it. Bush and Cheney did it, blah, blah, blah. To me, it's far more radical and actually far more frightening to think that the United States has meddled in the Middle East for so long and with such, force and violence that a bunch of people were willing to kidnap, hijack planes and blow up buildings with them. I mean, that's, to me, far more radical than the idea that some bad actor, for God knows what reason, would stage this. And so that's just kind of my rant today. But Bobby Kennedy's, assassination kind of provoked that, and his son's candidacy, which is getting surprising support from the left. Now, to some degree, I think that's just because Biden is old and pretty addled. But I think also people are really kind of building into this, and they see him as kind of a countercultural or a progressive figure because of these conspiracies he's spreading about, whether it be vaccines or his uncle's assassination or his dad's murder. And so avoid conspiracy. Just, Occam's razor, the most obvious explanation is usually the correct one.
Well, and then the other, I mean, also, RFK Jr. also plays into like other conspiracy theories too, which are a little bit more contemporary. He's an anti-vaxxer. He promotes a lot of misinformation around vaccines and masks and COVID and things along those lines. And so he is definitely. I always question whether people who are promoting these things are actually really bought in on them, or if they're just taking advantage of the opportunity. And so, he is definitely like an opportunist, where he's probably also he's definitely got a lot of supporters on the left, and there's like a pretty big anti-vaxxer movement on the left. I mean, I experience it a lot here in California. I'll be real, like this sort of new age hippie thing. But then, it's also, ironically, it's the way in which maybe people on the left are trying to build relations with people on the right with this anti-vaxxer, ridiculous garbage. So it's very disturbing. I'll say that in the least.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate that there's not like a legit, what I would call legitimate person, attacking Biden or going at Biden from the left.
Or running, just even running.
Yeah. I mean, just to raise this up, because I mean, the fact is, right now in polling, I've seen Kennedy and
it's probably going to be Trump, actually, is who's going to run to the left.
Run from the left, yeah, on certain issues, yeah. RFK and Marianne Williamson are polling combined at like what, 35 or 40?
Yeah.
So,
but I haven't seen a recent poll. The last poll I saw, Biden was at 62%, which means they're running at like 38% combined.
Yeah. I mean, that, in the famous, I've said this before on talking to you on this, probably recently, the famous 1968 New Hampshire primary that, kind of convinces LBJ to drop out. And that's been misremembered too. Eugene McCarthy did not defeat Lyndon Johnson. He ran well. I think he got like 35 or 40%. And that was enough.
And just in New Hampshire.
In New Hampshire, right. But that was enough, for a sitting president to say, oh, I'm in trouble. And actually another adjunct of that, because a lot of these conspiracy theory people have said Bobby Kennedy was killed because he was going to win the nomination and pull the party to the left. Bobby Kennedy was not going to get the nomination. Just wasn't going to happen any more than Bernie Sanders was going to win it in 2016. All political parties, except for the Republicans in 2016, much to their, I guess, credit, I don't know what you said. The Republicans in 2016 ran the most democratic, small d democratic primary I've ever seen, because the party leaders at that point early on hated Trump and they were terrified of him, right? And Buddy won the nomination. The Democrats, on the other hand, always monkey wrenches. And in 1968, they were operating under old rules where most of the delegates were just chosen by state party leaders, by national delegates, by labor, various big Democratic constituencies would choose delegates. So the fact that RFK won the California primary didn't mean by any means he wasn't even close to becoming the nominee. He wasn't going to become the nominee. Hubert Humphrey was clearly going to be the Democratic nominee that year. So the idea that they had to assassinate him to prevent that is just like the JFK assassination. It's just, there's nothing there. There's no evidence for it. And that's the thing, as lefties, we can have our beliefs, but at some point we should back it up with something real, not be like Republicans or these right-wing kooks sending memes out, all the time about stuff that never happened. And when the left starts doing that, it's no better. It's no more noble.
Drinking Oliver Stone's Kool-Aid, if you will. Like, he didn't touch on, in both JFK and a movie he made a few years later called Nixon with Anthony Hopkins, they not only lift up the JFK conspiracy, obviously in JFK they do that, they also lift up the conspiracy around RFK. And actually in one of them, at least, they also lift up a conspiracy around Martin Luther King, which is maybe the most credible of the three conspiracies.
That's worth looking into, probably, yeah, because that's bizarre. But well, Oliver Stone, I mean, look at how many lefties, we kind of joke about celebrities and failed comedians, but on the other hand, these people do have influence. And Oliver Stone, has driven, I mean, most Americans now believe that some form of JFK conspiracy theory. Look at how many leftists now are, pimping for atomic power, a show that we've just done, an interview we just did with Josh Frank, and Oliver Stone's all over that too. So these folks do have juice and they can influence us. And I'd say again, look beyond that and just do a little bit of research on your own.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's my history. That's my history lesson for, but and it's a shame, Bobby Kennedy. I think that there was a different politics brewing in 1968 with Martin Luther King, with Bobby Kennedy, with the farm workers, with the women's liberation movement. There was a lot going on.
Frank Church. I've actually been reading a biography of Frank Church, which actually was, he was so to the left of Johnson and the party that he actually he boycotted the DNC in 68.
I know, if you look at the liberals in 1968, they're way more left than like Bernie Sanders is today. And
Yeah.
there was a good core of probably a dozen or so who were, legit. Frank Church, even Republicans like Packwood and Javits were far to the left of today's Democrats.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you had I grew up in Ohio where, no one would think John Glenn and Metzenbaum are radicals, but again, they were far more progressive than any Democrats today
And
would be.
Frank Church was like a liberal Democrat, far to the left of anyone who would call themselves a liberal Democrat today from Idaho.
Yeah. Well, you had a bunch of, those states, Montana, Idaho, Washington had, the old isolationist tradition was still, strong enough that these people had come out of that. Minnesota, the DFL. So you had a legitimate liberal left movement in the 60s. And I think 1968 was kind of the heyday of it. And since then, it's really, hit the skids, and the Republicans have been on this full scale slash and burn offensive. And the Democratic Party, for the most part, has said, okay, we're going to go along with you. We just won't be quite as bad as you, but we're going to go with you. We're going to trail. And, so everything's farther and further and further to the right. That's why it's well, to some degree laughable, but it also kind of makes me sick to my stomach to hear these Republicans attacking, the Democratic Socialist or the Marxist in the Democratic Party, right? It's terrifying.
The groomer Marxists.
Yeah, it's just terrifying that they could get away with that.
Well, and the other terrifying thing, which I think is a good segue to the next couple of things that we want to talk about, is there are still some small pockets of people who are have more of that left liberal politic, an anti-authoritarian left politic, and they're being completely targeted by the state, and the state is like a bigger entity. And do you want to start off with the New York story?
Yeah, we could do that. Be brief, and this has gotten a fair amount of left media. A woman named Fatima Mohammed was I don't know if she was valedictorian or not, but she was giving a talk at the City University of New York Law School. And I believe she's Yemeni born. And in it, she defended Palestinian sovereignty and attacked Israel. And whether you like the language or not, whatever. But immediately afterward, as you can imagine, there was an uproar about this anti-Semitic, obviously, speech, right? And I think the part that's important to understand here is that she's, on the left, obviously, she's been defended, but she's also getting vilified, and liberals are a big part of that. CUNY has denounced it, saying that it was hate speech. New York's mayor, who's not really I don't know what he is, Eric Adams.
He's a cop, is what he is.
He's a cop. Not even a good one. I mean, kind of a half-assed cop, right? When he was on the force. Media has attacked her. Richie Torres, who was the congressman there, who was elected, I think, in 2018 or 2020. I don't know. I don't think he had DSA support. I don't think he's one of them. But Richie Torres has condemned her. He takes huge money from AIPAC. New York Democrats have condemned her. And, when we talk about cancellation, this is really the heart of cancellation. You and I, unlike a lot of, we're not liberals. We do believe that this kind of liberal woke stuff can go too far, right? And we do believe in free speech. But if you want to really talk about the way power is used to silence people, this is ground zero. You don't criticize Israel. And if you do, the Democrats and the liberals are going to go out. Look at same thing is happening to Roger Waters during a show in Germany. he, was doing kind of scenes from The Wall. And if you know anything about Pink Floyd, if you know anything about The Wall, and you know anything, excuse me, you know anything about Roger Waters, you know that that's an allegory of World War II, of fascism and everything else. And so at a show in Germany, he was doing kind of a representation of that, wearing a military uniform with a swastika on it, carrying a gun. And excuse me again, people are essentially attacking him and calling for investigations because, he's glorifying the Holocaust, which, as I said, if you know anything about The Wall, that's exactly the opposite of what Waters does. And, some people defended him at first and now they're recanting. And so, when you talk about cancel culture, let's get to the heart of it all. You don't say anything about Israel. I think that's kind of rule one of cancel culture. What other country has state laws saying you can't criticize it? In Texas, I'm allegedly not allowed to support BDS, right? If you're going to bring in a speaker to and give them an honorarium, in many places they have to sign a piece of paper saying they do not support BDS. So this is really, when you're talking about cancellation, it's more than anything, I think the state really uses its power to support Israel, no matter what Israel does. I mean, and even on the left, I mean, to bring back, something you and I went through in 2002, I was booted from Pacifica for criticizing Israel. And you would think, these radicals in Pacifica, and they fell for it as well, these Zionist mirrors. So it's a real thing. And I think, when you talk about canceling, this is really ground zero. And liberals are a big part of this too. And that's something I think that we have to be concerned about. And I know in a minute or so, I think you're going to talk about Atlanta, and that's a liberal joint as well, right?
Yeah, and just to kind of like get into that, like this is like another this is another sort of um this is another story about the state, the system, the real system, right? The stuff that we read about in the paper, not some hidden, mysterious deep state, basically waging war on a movement. And so we've done multiple shows on the Defend the Atlanta Forest movement. We've reported on the murder of one of the forest offenders, Tortuguita, who was killed by the Georgia State Patrol back in January. And so, if anything, the state of Georgia and the city of Atlanta, which are politically two very different entities when you kind of look at it, we have the sort of state of Georgia is run by a very conservative Republican party, and then you have the city of Atlanta, which is run by what I actually would say is conservative, Black, big D Democratic leadership. And they're waging war on this like scrappy little movement in the Wahani forest, which has murdered one of the forest offenders. But now they've been using this Georgia law, which they passed in 2017, which was actually enacted to take on like right-wing mass shooters, like what happened in Charleston in 2015. They enacted this law because of Dylan Roofs of the world. And they've been charging forest offenders. I think it's up to almost 40 now, if not more. We're actually going to do a show. We're going to interview a lawyer about this in the next, actually probably in the next few days, to get a little bit more of a background on this. But they've been charging people with domestic terrorism, and there are people still in jail who have been charged with domestic terrorism. For attending a music festival, for having mud on their shoes. There's
writing the phone number of the
lawyers,
bail fund, and lawyers and bail fund on your own. Yeah.
Right. And so then this week, the state of Georgia and the city and the Atlanta police basically went after the Atlanta Solidarity Committee, which is a bail fund. We actually had a show on bail funds last year. There's over 100 bail funds around the country. They became very prevalent after the 2020 uprisings. But the three members of the Atlanta Solidarity Committee, which is a collective that has bailed out protesters and helped them find lawyers, were specifically cited for money laundering and charity fraud. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, the leader of that very conservative Georgia Republican Party has said that has called them, aiding and abetting domestic terrorism. He put out a statement when they arrested the Solidarity Committee that they would track down every member of a criminal organization, from violent foot soldiers to their uncaring leaders. And, he's talking about people who run a bail fund like they're Al Qaeda or ISIS. It's very, very just disconcerting, this sort of propaganda that they're putting out. That there's this whole other media ecosystem which is just eating this shit up, right? This right-wing ecosystem is just eating this shit up. Media ecosystem is eating this shit up. The judge, Sean Deanna Morris, who was a Brian Kemp appointee, signed off on the arrest and raid warrants, which cite the use of PayPal as evidence of money laundering. So you're a money launderer if you use PayPal, just to kind of put that out there. If you look at the warrants, it's mostly to do things like buy food or pay phone bills or, things like that. So that's, I'm not joking either. It's just, it's the direction we're headed actually as a society, I would say.
Using PayPal is proof that you're not laundering money, because when you launder money, you don't leave a trail. You go to some surreptitious place, you launder it where there's no record, where there's no trail of it. Yeah. PayPal is the exact opposite of that, yeah. Right? So
if they own some car washes and had, it was a cash business, I'd be thinking more a little bit about money laundering.
Yeah,
but I'm not in the Georgia Attorney General's office, so what do I know?
Yeah, I'm thinking of that scene in Breaking Bad with the big pallets of cash.
Yeah. And so the Deputy Attorney General, who's like one of the lead prosecutors, John Fowler, told a judge on Friday that the activists present a flight risk because they harbor extremist anti-government views, and that money raised by the bail fund has gone towards numerous violent acts. The judge, who I didn't actually get his name, didn't really buy this, and actually said, quote unquote, "There's no meat on these bones. This is a pretty thin case you have," and granted them all, the three members of the Solidarity Committee, about $15,000. They granted them $15,000 bail each, and they've actually already been bailed out. And
that's outrageous, but that's actually a fairly negligible amount compared to what they always do. But isn't the point of this just to intimidate and scare people? It's not really,
Yeah.
And
yeah, what we're looking at here is there's an infrastructure within movements that we use to support people who are like taking action, mostly nonviolent action, definitely unarmed action. And they're not just going after the activists, which is what they've been doing with the domestic terror charges. They are actually going after the infrastructure which supports the activists, right? Just to put that out there. Ironically, on the same day, coincidentally, maybe not, a pretty noted constitutional lawyer actually filed a suit against the state of Georgia challenging the domestic terror law, which is, when in the past, when we've seen states enact these laws, which basically repress like First Amendment rights, you have to violate the law, and then you have to get like a constitutional lawyer to challenge it. And that's kind of what is happening in Georgia at this point. And so the state is responding to that. They've also released records of audio from the Atlanta police prior to the raid. There's actually been a number of like city council meetings where they've actually been challenging actually Cop City. Turns out that where the city council said it would only cost $30 million to build Cop City, now it's come out that it's going to cost $60 million. And so there's been a lot of like challenges to that. And so it feels like this is also a little bit of just smoke and mirrors to kind of like pull away from the First Amendment case around the domestic terror law, and then also how there's a real good chance that Cop City is not going to be built, partially because of the sort of like upsurge of activism against it, and then also partially because there's the city of Atlanta has just been so dishonest about the whole thing.
I believe it was Matthew Dowd who was George W. Bush's speechwriter. Did he come up with the axis of evil line even? Maybe. I think he might have. At any rate.
Yeah, I think maybe, yeah.
But he has kind of a famous line where he says, once we get you using our language, we've won. And I think he may have specifically been talking about terrorism. And I've noticed that, in the last 10, 15 years where liberals want things deemed terrorism. There's right-wing terrorism, and I get it. Some of these things are awful. But when you go around clamoring for the state to deem certain acts to be terrorist, then you really are opening the door to the inevitability of, animal rights defenders or environmental defenders or people who write the name of a lawyer's phone number on their arm are going to be accused of terrorism. And so, I think, that's another thing for people on the left or liberals. Don't be so quick to say, oh, they're terrorists. You need to get them on enhanced terrorism charges and all that stuff. I mean, stuff like January 6th is way over the line. I don't even probably would agree with that being terrorism. But the point is, no one on the left is doing anything anywhere like that. Having a hammock or a concert in a woods isn't like, going to the Capitol and busting through windows with guns, and so the left needs to be careful about wanting everything labeled terrorist and wanting the state to come and crack down on all this stuff.
I guess it terrorizes the establishment because ruling class because they think they're like somehow threatened by it.
Well, then they're cupcakes, which and we know they are, but yeah. But don't be so quick to kind of label everything terrorist and say the state should, I mean, I don't have any problem with the way that people are paying for what they did on January 6th. That's violence, right? That's, I mean, if you did that under any circumstances, there would be consequences to it. It's vandalism, it's property destruction, it's violence. That's fine. But it ain't terrorism, in Atlanta. That's just not, that's ridiculous. But you've kind of created this atmosphere where they could get away with that.
Yeah. And I want to say that, well, one, we've seen something like 18 to 20 different states enact anti-protest laws, some of which equate protest to terrorism, some of which make it legal for people to drive through a crowd of protesters blocking a street and you won't get charged with homicide. There's all kinds of like really troubling things like that happening. And that's the sort of thing you mostly would expect to happen in a red state. And that's where a lot of those laws are being enacted. But also just this last week, Jordan Neely, who was a homeless man who was going through a mental health crisis, got murdered on a subway in New York. He was actually strangled to death by a former Marine, I believe. And
Daniel Penny.
And it has been like, it's been news in itself, and particularly in New York. And so protests have started happening, justice for Jordan Neely protests. And this week, there was a protest, actually, I believe in Harlem at a subway station. And some of the protesters actually went into the subway tunnels, which, to disrupt the subway over protest of Jordan Neely and things like that. And the NYPD arrested them and charged them with domestic terror. Now, the Manhattan DA has dropped those charges, but we're also seeing an escalation even in these sort of like, liberal bastions. I mean, Eric Adams, who is the mayor of New York, who's an ex-cop, and he's a Democrat, but he's like a very conservative, like law and order sort of Democrat, has like really been, flexing muscle and giving the NYPD a lot longer leash to go after opposition. I mean, they do things. They're clearing homeless encampments in New York. They're really sort of like upping the sort of broken windows, sort of like policing. It seems like, but all because they're Democrats, it's all with like this sort of like diversity, with this sort of diversity filter on it. In fact, they're painting their police cars rainbow for Pride. And my other favorite little nugget of a story this week is how some, subliminal messaging artist or designer put all colors are beautiful on the NYPD police cars for their Pride, for Pride, which, if you think about it, all colors are beautiful. The acronym is ACAB, which is what's the other acronym that they use for ACAB? What is that, Bob? Do you know?
All cops are beautiful.
All cops are bastards. And the police commissioner even tweeted it out. So there you go.
Yeah.
Resistance, sometimes just a little bit of resistance and humor and on Twitter is what gets me through the day.
Yeah. I mean, you take it when you can get it, but
yeah,
I mean, I think clearly the state is willing to use its power against anyone who gets in the way, and this is something we've talked about a lot, right? This is America. It's not new, and it's not just a product of kind of racial tensions. It's much bigger than that. And if you're a white environmental activist in the suburbs, they'll come after you if they think that you're kind of in the way. And so let's keep in mind that cops aren't our friends,
yep.
no matter what.
Yeah, they're out to destroy us.
Yeah.
When we were earlier talking about the FBI and Leonard Peltier and things like that, I mean, a little bit of a different circumstance, little situation. Some of the these aren't folks who've gone to life. No one's gone to life or prison. People have been murdered though. But like this is the role that the FBI and the police and the local police and the police state play, and they're defending the interests of the ruling class against whoever gets in their way.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I don't know if you have anything else.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about one other.
Okay.
Yeah, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is something that's also been has been like big, sort of in my world of environmental direct action. The Mountain Valley Pipeline is a pipeline where it's a 300-mile fracked gas project that crosses the Appalachian Trail. It goes into the Jefferson National Forest through West Virginia and Virginia. There's been a long time direct action campaign in the backwoods against the Mountain Valley Pipeline. In many ways, it's been defeated. Like a lot of the permitting has been stopped. Manchin last year, when he was passing the Inflation Reduction Act, actually tried to get an amendment in there so it would be fast tracked. And so then we get into the debt ceiling negotiations, which we haven't really talked about too much. And it's not really our thing to talk about things like that too much. But I wanted to mention this is that Manchin put in what they call a poison pill, which is like an amendment to fast track the Mountain Valley Pipeline and other fossil fuel projects. And so they passed it. Like a number of Democrats voted against it, but it still passed because of Manchin and Sinema. I think John Tester and some other like conservative Democrats voted to make it happen. Not only does it fast track fossil fuel projects like the Mountain Valley Pipeline, but it also weakened the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. And so just a couple of things about Joe Manchin. He's a millionaire who's basically made his money off of owning coal plants in West Virginia. One, and then two, he's the top recipient of fossil fuel money in Congress, more than any Republicans who get paid. I mean, he is currently the chair of the Natural Resources Committee, and he is that important swing vote. And so it makes sense that he's getting all the money right now, but still. And then the other part is that we'll probably see a lot more direct action in the backcountry as this pipeline they start to ramp up construction on the pipeline again. We've already seen protests erupt in Washington and New York, targeted Manchin and Schumer and other members of Congress over the last week or two. So just wanted to say something about that. And that's another example of the Democratic Party, which is no longer in the tradition of Frank Church or Bobby Kennedy or anyone like that. It's Manchin's essentially a Republican at this point.
The last thing I want to say is 3 years ago, right now, I think we're reaching kind of the high point of the protests following the murder of George Floyd. And I believe this is kind of maybe even today is the anniversary of Trump's famous photo op at the church, right, where they cleared the protesters.
St. John's Church. St. John's.
Yeah,
Church.
It was at any rate, it was a time that was scary, right? Because you had no idea what the state was going to do. I mean, it really, they were out there grabbing people off the streets. They were, not wearing identifying, insignia. People were getting shot at, using what they called less than lethal weapons. And it was a scary time, but it was also a time of, I think, hope, right? If you look at those early polling data, big majorities of Americans supported Black Lives Matter, said the police were out of control, supported the burning of a police precinct in Minneapolis. thought that the protests were legitimate, wanted Confederate statues toppled, all that stuff. Most Americans, believed in that, and sometimes by a good margin. And then it all went away. And we can, and clearly Trump and his group had a lot to do with that backlash. But keep in mind, too, that as soon as that happened, liberals jumped in and said, "Oh, we don't want to defund the police. That's a bad word. We would never do that." Or, well, we're going to give you more money. And that's kind of what's happened. Democratic mayors and Joe Biden have neglected that momentum that helped bring them to election victory in 2020. And they've essentially said, yeah, you guys did a lot of work in the streets for us, but we don't want to be associated with you. And so here we are, where 3 years later, the police are killing more people than ever before. They're doing it on video. They're getting away with it. It's not much different. And so, in the aftermath of what we thought may have been a reckoning, or maybe, a slight transformation in 2020, we're just back to where we've been through all this time. So keep the pressure on. And this is why you need scrappy people out there, because, if you count on, folks you elect to office, they don't really care about you. So.
Yep. It's important to note how the Democratic politicians, especially the Beltway, particularly the Beltway crowd, are just so dismissive of the people who helped put them in office. Like in 2020 and 2022, it was Gen Z who really saved the Democrats' ass against Trump, and from the red wave, which never really manifested. And you see Dianne Feinstein, mocking kids like this a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, but mocking kids who were asking her about their climate future based on what she votes on. And then we saw Kamala Harris recently, making fun of Gen Zers. This is just like so stupid. And she was calling them dumb and, whatever. But like, it just seems like completely unstrategic and not smart that this like sort of like group of people who put you in the office is to mock them.
And that's why I think the debt ceiling talks actually were important, not really the minutia of it. But the fact is that the Democratic Party, and Biden's bragging now about bipartisanship and compromise, essentially bailed on issues that were important to the people who voted for them. Student debt relief and, the environment, and essentially, you have this Republican bill, McCarthy. And what I think is what's hilarious is that I think McCarthy won. I think the Republicans won that, political standoff. And the far right Republicans are basically saying Biden won. Biden took us to the cleaners. It's so fucking ass backwards nowadays, right? That, there's no left. We know that, but Jesus Christ, I mean, it's scary. But the Democratic Party, yeah, just, they say, give us your votes, and then they just dump all over you and don't really give a shit about you. And, we're going to see that again. They're going to like raise this fear about how bad Trump is, and you need to go out because it's the most important election of your lifetime, and the choices are so stark and all that other blah blah blah. And great, I'm glad Trump's not president anymore, but the world's hardly better off because of Biden. And the terrifying thing now is that another Trump term will be merely retributive. So nothing's going to get done, and it's going to get worse. So you're really screwed. And I do have some hope in young people, so I hope they continue to go out there and raise hell. And
we just have to vote we have to vote blue no matter
who.
Yeah.
You see, Cinema was like at a rally or something with Trump. God, she's just disgusting,
Yeah, it's bad. On a high note, people in Atlanta are still raising hell. They had a city council meeting speaking out against Cop City, and there was and hundreds lined up to speak in front of each getting 2 minutes in front of the city council, and not one single person spoke in support of Cop City. So, and that's youth, and they organize college campuses and high schools and middle schools in Atlanta to resist that terrible project. So, youth, hopefully our demographics our Gen Zers don't listen to us that much, but if they did, we hope they would like what we say.
Yeah, and that's kind of the cool thing about getting involved, because it can be scary, right? I mean, you know, you get into situations where you don't know what's going to happen, especially when there's police around. But when you're around a group of people and you see other people doing this, it's a lot easier to get
Yeah.
involved. If somebody speaks for 2 minutes, it's a lot. You say, well, I can do that, you know, and then pretty soon you find out there's a lot of you out there, probably more of you than them, right?
Yeah.
And it
And they
becomes
know it, and
fairly
that's what they're
empowering.
scared of.
Of course, that's what they're afraid of. Yeah, and it becomes empowering, right? That's why they want to intimidate you and frighten you, and you know, make you even reluctant to donate to a bail support fund, right? Oh, you know, if there's a record of me giving them money, I might get in trouble. You know, they can't come after all of us, and they know that. And essentially, a lot of this, you know, I've always said this: the ruling class is very big and powerful. It has a ton of ways to get at you, but a part of it is it's kind of like you know, the wizard behind the curtain. You know, the great and powerful laws, and then you pull it away, and it's this fat out little man, Trump or Biden, right? So,
Yeah, exactly.
so anyway, you know, go out there, and I mean, it's okay to be afraid, but you know, there is strength in a union. There's power in these numbers, and I know you and I have been in that situation many times. And I don't know about you. I mean, there've been plenty of times I've gone out like with great concern over what was going to happen. You know, when you're, you know, in a crowd and you have a bunch of cops on motorcycles or horses, you know, who are screaming and they're in a microphone yelling, and you have people, and it's not a pleasant scene. But, you know, when you look around and you see everybody holding their ground and being firm, then you get empowered yourself. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yep. Folks, you've been listening to the Sunday Fun Day, Scrappy Summer, witty banter of the Green and Red podcast. It's Scrappy Sunday. We hope you like what you've been listening to. If so, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. If you are watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you are listening to this on one of the many audio platforms that we're on about a dozen of them. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Give us a rate and review. We need that to help with the algorithms. And if you really want to support us, make a donation to greenandredpodcast.org and hit that support button, or become a patron at patreon.com/greenredpodcast. We will talk to you all again soon. Happy Scrappy Sunday. Go raise a lot of hell, because that's what we're going to do too. Talk to you later.